All right, for this example, we're going to find the equation of a circle that is tangent to the line 3x minus 4y minus 4 equals 0 at the point 0, negative 1 and containing the point negative 1, negative 8. Now this negative 1, negative 8 is on the circle. And it goes through the point 0, negative 1 as well, and that is where this line is tangent. So the first thing that we want to do here is we want to think about drawing the picture. So here's my center somewhere. I don't know what it is, so I'm going to use H and K. But here's my point 0, negative 1, and my circle also has to go through the point negative 1, negative 8, so I've drawn a rough circle here. The line that was given is the tangent line, and so in order to do that, I have to draw that. And then I know that the radius here goes to this center. And like we saw in our previous example, we know that this radius and the perpendicular bisector of this line will intersect at the center. So we're going to look at line 1 being the radius of this line, and line 2 being the perpendicular bisector of this chord between 0, negative 1 and negative 1, negative 8. Now, if we go up here, we also need to think about rewriting this equation in the terms of y equals mx plus b. If we do that, then we can get the slope, and then if we know the slope of the tangent line, we can find the slope of the radius, because these two lines are perpendicular to each other. Since they're perpendicular to each other, their slopes are opposite reciprocals. So if I move the 4, add the 4y to the other side, and then divide everything by 4, I get 3/4 x minus 1 equals y. Remember, this is my slope. So the slope of the radius, this line right here, is the negative reciprocal of that. So the negative reciprocal of 3/4 is negative 4/3. And it goes through the point 0, negative 1. So we're going to use that to write our equation of the line for the radius. I chose to use the point slope form in this particular case. Y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. You can use y equals mx plus b if you'd prefer. You just have to remember to go back and write the equation. When you distribute the negative 4/3 x through, you get this. Minus a negative is plus. In order to take that 1 to the other side, I need to move it over here. So I subtract it from both sides, and I get y equals negative 4/3 x minus 1. And that is the equation for the line that passes through that radius. Now we need to do the perpendicular bisector of this chord. So in order to do that, we need both the slope and the midpoint. Well, the slope is negative 8 minus negative 1 over negative 1 minus 0, which ends up being a positive 7. That is the slope of this line right here, the chord that connects the 2 points on the circle. We need its perpendicular bisector, so we need to take the negative reciprocal of that, which would be negative 1/7. Then we need the midpoint to be able to have a point on the line. And the midpoint, even though my drawing may not look like it, that's supposed to be the midpoint, is x1 plus x2 divided by 2 and y1 plus y2 divided by 2. When we do that, we get negative 1/2 and negative 9/2. Negative 1 plus 0 over 2, negative 8 plus negative 1 over 2. Now that we have the point and the slope, we can again use that point slope form and end up with our equation of the line. So the equation of this, when I distribute the negative 1/7 through, I get negative 1/7 x minus 1/14, because this would be a positive, but I'm still multiplying by a negative. Minus a negative would be plus. Subtracting the 9/2 from both sides. Think about making this with a common denominator. So this needs to be negative 63 over 14. So I get negative 1/7 x minus 64, because I have a negative 1 and a negative 63. That gives me that negative 64 over 14. But that will simplify. So now we have our two equations. We have the y equals negative 4/3 x minus 1, and y equals negative 1/7 x minus 32/7. So here are our two equations. That should be a 32/7. That looks like that's a little off there. So let me fix that here so that we realize that that is a fraction. Now, I really don't like all these fractions, and simplifying that is kind of tricky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply everything through by 21. So I'm going to take 21 times this. That's going to cancel here, which is going to leave me a negative 28x, because 3 goes into 7, or excuse me, 3 goes into 21 7 times. Then I'm going to take the 7 times the negative 4. I'm going to take the 21 times the negative 1, which is going to give me negative 21. Then I'm going to do the same thing over here. Multiplying this by 21. Well, 7 goes into 21 3 times, so it's really a negative 1 times 3, which gives me the negative 3x. Same thing here, 21 is going to go into 7. Make sure that you are distributing that to both terms. So we have 21 goes into 7 3 times, or excuse me, 7 goes into 21 3 times, and that leaves me 3 times negative 32, which is a negative 96. Collecting up my like terms, I'm going to add the 3x to this side and add the 21 to this side. Gives me negative 25x equals negative 75. Dividing both sides by negative 25 says x equals 3. That's nice, it's not a fraction. And then I pick one of these two equations. But since x is 3 and I have 3 in the denominator right here, I'm going to choose that first equation and substitute in my x, or my 3 for x. Negative 4 thirds times 3 ends up being negative 4, minus 1 is negative 5. So x is 3 and y is negative 5. That gives me my center. Now, if we go back and look at our picture, we need the center and the radius. So again, we need the distance. You can again use either one of these 2 points. So I chose 3, negative 5 and 0, negative 1. And I substituted into the distance formula to find the radius. So I subtract my 2 x's and square it, and I subtract my 2 y's and square it, which gives me 9 plus 16, which is nice because it works out to be the square root of 25, which is 5. So now I have the center is 3, negative 5, and the radius is 5. So the last thing I need to do is write that standard form of the equation. 5 squared equals x minus 3 squared, plus y minus a negative 5 squared. But doing some simplification, we have 25 equals x minus 3 squared plus y plus 5 squared. And that is the equation of the circle that passes through those 2 points and is tangent to that line at the point 0, negative 1. So this equation would be 25 squared equals x minus 3 quantity squared plus y plus 5 quantity squared. Just right there.